This is the e-learning podcast, episode number 30.
In the age of a pandemic, I do think there are some major hurdles for PhD students. Now, with that said, if we look at using the internet and reaching out to colleagues in all possible continents, I think this pandemic has been speeding up things for many of us.
Welcome to the e-learning podcast from lmspulse.com. My name is Stephen Laddick, and I'm the director at LMS Pulse. My guest today is Dr. Eva Lanstoght, a civil engineer from Belgium, currently a tenured research professor at USFQ in Ecuador, and a Duolingo success story. But if you're in the process of either starting or completing your doctoral studies, chances are that you're more familiar with her work at PhD Talk, a blog and podcast that she created. PhD Talk is an amazing resource covering everything there is to know about the doctoral student life, from figuring out your dissertation topic and research planning, to networking, time management and getting better sleep, to, of course, the many ways online learning has transformed postgraduate education, which, in Dr. Eva's opinion, are ultimately beneficial for students and the global research communities. In this exciting conversation, we talk about what it's like to be Eva, her engineering background, how she ended up in South America, her writing and the origins of the PhD Talk blog, and the podcast as well. We also talk about why she's optimistic about the mix of postgraduate education and online learning, especially when it comes to building community and fostering partnerships. And of course, the many educational hurdles that still remain and the way technology can help, if not totally replace, field studies and research labs. We also talk about what has made PhD Talk such an important reference and support tool, not just for PhD students, but also for master graduates thinking about their next chapter, and even more than a few tenured professors interested in learning how to do a better job online. We also talk about the importance of support systems and organizations that help teachers to work on their digital competencies, and the fascinating case of Shift, whose help allowed Dr. Eva's students avoid long hours at the Zoom in exchange for more engaging and personal exchanges. We finally talk about Dr. Eva's advice for doctoral students in a mostly online learning world. Stay flexible and get comfortable with networking with the whole world. But before we get started, a quick word from our sponsors.
The e-learning podcast is sponsored by the e-learning Success Summit. Learn from more than 40 experts how to teach, work, and learn online without being overwhelmed. Get your free ticket to the summit at elearningsuccesssummit.com. And lmspulse.com, your best source for news, information, and resources for e-learning professionals for more than 10 years. Get our free roundup of the week's top news at lmspulse.com.
Hello, Eva. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Stephen. Thank you for having me.
Eva, we're recording this at the beginning of November in 2020. Where does that find you sitting right now in the world?
I am at this moment in Ecuador, in Quito.
In Quito. Now, your accent tells me that you might not be from Quito. Where are you originally from?
I am from the north of Belgium, so I am a native speaker of Flemish Dutch.
Okay, fantastic. So let's just start there. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? So what's your profession? What do you do? And how did you get to Quito from Belgium?
Sure. So I am a civil engineer. I originally studied civil engineering in Belgium. Then I went for a second master's to Georgia Tech, where I sat in class next to a boy from Quito, who now is my husband. And then I actually returned to Europe. I went to TU Delft in the Netherlands for doing my PhD. And after getting my PhD, I became a part-time researcher at TU Delft and a professor in the civil engineering department at Universidad San Francisco de Quito.
Wow, nice. Now, did you learn Spanish, when you got down there, or was that something that you had studied all the time, or you were good at it already?
I spoke virtually no Spanish when I arrived here, so I actually learned it with Duolingo.
Hey, you're a Duolingo success story? Are you serious?
Yes. So I, when I was here, I think second month that I was here, I was like, okay, I don't understand anybody. I don't understand my family-in-law. I need to do something. And I don't really have time to take a full class because I was also starting teaching and still traveling to a number of conferences. I said, well, just try this thing that people have been talking about. And with, of course, I spoke French before, and I had learned Latin in school, so it was easy to. So it was easy to like soak up from conversations, and then by learning some of the basics, I could get around.
Nice. So that's fantastic. I always love figuring out where's the special sauce there, because I've used Duolingo. I live in Mexico City right now, and I also have the privilege of having lived in Costa Rica for 5 years. So, my Spanish is, I'm way beyond beginner, but I'm not conversant, in any sort of fluent type of way. And I'm always like, so what's the next thing? And really, ultimately, the special sauce for me is just talking every day, getting in conversations, being there, right? But it's great to hear that you had that's e-learning, right? That was a success story.
Yes.
You saying,
Yes.
I needed it. In this case, it was a tool that facilitated your translation, or you can use your French background and you're in context to get there. Give me some, and I know this isn't what we want to talk about, but I'm fascinated by this. Is how long ago was this? So
2013. So
okay, like 7 years ago. So like this was
November 2013-ish.
This wasn't an app yet. This was still a website. Duolingo.
It was it was a website. Because
Okay.
now I'm actually I've started to use Duolingo again a couple of months ago to learn Swedish, just out of curiosity.
What you do.
Because I'm not busy enough. And now I do feel that the chunks are much shorter. I remember at that time, it was really like sitting for a lesson of about 20 minutes, half an hour to get through my daily practice. And now I can just do it, I don't know, less than 5 minutes and get through one of the lessons and earn some hearts and whatnot. So
fantastic. Well, that's great. I love it. I love that you you had that success story. That's both inspiring to me and it's probably inspiring to lots of people, especially during the pandemic, where, hey, if you have some free time, which the irony of the pandemic that we're all finding is that we actually are working so much more and people have zero free time. That maybe you can use that to to your advantage, learn a new language. But let's talk about you. So you wanted to talk about you have a blog out there called PhD Talk, and PhD Talk is about going through that process of getting a PhD. What does it take? What's the effort? Where are the twists and turns? Like, how do you set yourself up for success? So I want to talk about that for a while, and then also move into the what's it like, once you've got that and you're either as a professor or you're, some sort of other personal entrepreneur selling courses out there or whatever, who, what's it like to be doing all of this online now? So let me just take it over you. Tell us about PhD Talk. Where did that start from? And then where's that right now? And how have things changed since we're all online now?
Sure. So PhD Talk started in 2010. I started the blog when I was just starting the second year of my PhD, and I had blogs before, just writing about my adventures as an exchange student in the past and things like that. And nobody ever read them except my mom and my best friend. And I thought, well, I'll start another blog and nobody will ever read it. But I just like looking back and see what I've done in the past and sharing some of the things that worked in the lab or things that didn't work. And I started to write down my wins and things that worked for me and sometimes things that hadn't worked out in the lab. And it actually took off more than I expected. And well, it's still there 10 years later in 2020. And along the way, I've expanded the topics a little bit into advice as well for early career researchers and anything that I would like to write about. But the focus is still providing guidance for PhD students. I don't really believe in a fixed mold of this is what a PhD should look like. I just like to raise the attention of PhD students to all the tools that are out there and that they can explore things and see what works for them and fit that into their research practice.
So have you found, as your popularity has grown, is there a typical person that comes and stumbles into your blog and then starts to engage with you? Is it somebody who's considering a PhD? Somebody who's already started and trying to figure it out? Is it somebody who's trying to finish? Because you know, the ABD, right? The all but dissertation. Like, that's a huge chunk of people out there. Who's your typical reader right now?
I would have thought that my typical reader is a PhD student, but it turns out to be anywhere from master students who are working on their thesis and want some advice on writing, all the way down to professors who are supervising PhD students and who just like reading on like kind of going back and recalling what was it like to do a PhD. So there's the whole spectrum.
Really interesting. Wow. And so what has changed about doing a PhD in the age of the pandemic, in the age, and let's not even say that, in the age where online learning and remote learning are not only a possibility, but it's an inevitability, right? Blended learning is what we do now. And so as a PhD candidate or as a PhD student, you're going to have to do your couple of years of requirements, and then you're going to do your research, and then obviously write a dissertation. How has that changed that universe?
Well, first of all, I feel really bad for PhD students who cannot be in their labs at this moment, who cannot go to the fieldwork they were looking forward to, who cannot go to the conference in Hawaii that they really were looking forward to get a break. So I in the age of the pandemic, I do think there are some major hurdles for PhD students. Now, with that said, if we look at using the internet and reaching out to colleagues in all possible continents, I think this pandemic has been speeding up things for many of us. I was already, since I work both in the Netherlands and Ecuador, I was already using video conferences with my PhD students regularly, and I already had my TU Delft laptop with the right settings, so I don't have to physically go to IT support and get them to make fixes for me. I already had like my administrator rights, which I obtained and things like that. So I already had some experience with that. And while in the past I noticed there were some hesitations of people to focus on the video conferences, now it's like, yeah, it's actually easier to meet whoever we're collaborating with. And in terms of doing research, I think for many PhD students, this has opened opportunities to collaborate with fellow PhD students that work on the same topic that may be in a different continent, that otherwise you may have met them perhaps in person at a conference or maybe not. And now that has, I think it has become easier to reach out and have those discussions through any video conferencing tool that there may be.
Fantastic. And that's really interesting. I love the glass half full approach to it, because we've heard so many people, and again, people who've listened to the show, I have 3 children, so they're in online school all the time. And, we're just waiting for that time when it's like, can we at least go 50% back into school, because the culturalization and the socialization and just, the mental break from being a parent all the time and working whatnot it's overwhelming, right? But then looking at it from the other side, where rather than saying, hey, virtual summits or virtual conferences, people have a lot of fatigue of that now, right? Because everybody's got a virtual conference, right? Even we do, right? But it's an opportunity, and being able to work with people around the globe, it's an opportunity rather than, hey, maybe sometime I'll contact that person in Australia. Now it's like, wow, I got it, this is a thing. Do you find that that's the typical sentiment? Or is that it? I mean, there's a huge amount of coaching around that and bringing that mindset. So is that a conversation you're having often?
I think it really depends on the situation of the person. Just as you mentioned, for people who are at home with children, trying to focus on research, it's really tough. For somebody who now may be able to work from home and focus on writing papers, it may be heaven. So there's and as I said in the beginning, I don't think there's one PhD student who fits the mold for everybody. There's no one research that fits the mold for everybody. So I think there's a range of experiences, and I'm actually right at this moment working on research with collaborators in all continents of the world on how being a parent and an academic at the same time has impacted our research and our teaching. And I think we'll be closing our survey any of these days and start gathering the data. And again, from what I already looked at some of the responses, there is a wide variety of outcomes there. So I think the importance here is to really acknowledge that, to know that there are so many different experiences at this moment, even though we're all working from home and dealing with constraints, but the way it affects our research and our teaching, or PhD research is vastly different, whether you are a first year PhD student who may be just starting out and for whom this is the new normal, or you are at the end of your PhD, but still need to have that last set of data at a field site where you can get to that. That's such a range of experiences that is.
Well, yes, I was noticing, you did your PhD on shear and reinforced concrete slabs under concentrated loads close to the support, right? I mean, this is something where you're going to have to do some either lab tests or actual real field tests of standing a building up on concrete slabs. Is that, I want to kind of I have two questions. Is that a topic or a PhD focus where maybe at this stage right now, you'd say to that candidate, say, hey, maybe take a year off, maybe have a gap year before you do this, because you're not even going to be able to do that lab work for a while? Or is it worth it to like, hey, jump in and get the requirements done? So I guess the real question is there anybody who you're saying to right now, say, look, just, maybe put your application in, but defer for a year until this is happening? Or is your advice always jump in no matter what your topic is?
That's a very good question. And actually, I have a PhD student who is continuing my work right at this moment, who was struggling with the fact that there were major restrictions in the lab. And of course, we've been thinking what we can do to keep her research going and be able to get to the deliverables on time. And luckily, our lab never closed 100%, but my hope was to be there in the Netherlands this summer for, I had everything in place to be there for 9 weeks and to be able to be in the lab together with her and to see everything and touch everything. So we had to look for creative solutions. And again, I think it really depends on where somebody is, what the specific restraints in the country and lab may be to have that conversation with who is your supervisor and see who else of your colleagues can step in. I've luckily had one of my colleagues who stepped in to co-supervise and to be able to go see how things are in the lab. So my main point here is I think it's important both for PhD students at this moment as well as for supervisors to have those conversations, not just try to steam through or not just try to cut things, but just have an honest conversation, see where you are, what you can do, who else can step in and take it from there.
It's great. And you kind of bring me back to the two of the principles that I have found is in this, where we're at today, is have an adult human conversation and understand that we are in a time that requires immense flexibility, right? And if those two pieces of emotional intelligence, if there's any two things that I could give to anyone, those would be the two pieces of advice, because that's just that it's going to change everything about your relationships that you have, student teacher or teacher, or student lab work or whatever. But then also understanding that we are in a time of massive upheaval and change. It's like that flexibility, it's absolutely critical. Is there any, and I mean this tongue in cheek, are there any great fails or like super aha moments that you've had over the last, let's just say 8 to 10 months, where it's just like, I can't believe that this actually works, or wow, I had to totally pivot this research because that didn't change, or wow, that, that's just not going to happen now. Like, is there anything that sticks out in your mind?
The research that I just mentioned, that I started on how being a parent and an academic at the same time has influenced our research or teaching. It's not a topic that I would otherwise have thought of working on.
I was just going to say, as someone who is focused on construction materials, yeah, okay.
Yes. and having the ability to reach out to other academics in the United States, in Europe, in Asia, in Australia, to work on this together with me has been a very interesting, very nice experience that otherwise probably I would never have made the time to work on such a topic. And also in terms of daily routines, because I work with my colleagues in the Netherlands, I was always before 7 a.m. in my office doing my calls to the Netherlands. And I was trying to hold on to that, trying to have those 7 a.m. calls. And then my daughter would wake up and wander into the room with her sleepy head and looking very hungry at me and asking where breakfast is. And I would be like super frazzled or try to be on the call while spooning cereal in her mouth. And after a while, I told my colleagues and students, like, hey, let's change the time because this is getting too messy for me.
Cool. Yeah. So I want to flip the topic now from people who are, entering into the PhD, and many people enter PhD. I don't know, maybe you know these statistics, but I think it's probably still people go into have a PhD mostly for academia because they want to be a part of academia. They want to do that. And there's still a significant number of people who do that in order to then go into a profession or go into industry. There's almost always a teaching component that comes out of that regardless, right? So if I'm now flipping it and having the conversation about being a teacher online, what have you discovered? What are the things that you are using in your techniques? Especially, I liked having we have so many conversations around how do you do little kids, right? The K through 12 universe. Yeah. What's new about higher education, about student engagement, about lesson planning, about holding a class, when to use lectures, these kinds of things? Like, take it away.
I'll start with my personal experience here. I'm actually on my third semester of teaching online now. I flipped to emergency online teaching in the spring. Then I had a full online summer course, and now I'm again fully online for my fall course until further notice. But since we're in November, I guess that further notice will be the full semester.
One thing, to interrupt you right there too, like, so I still I teach a class at American University in Washington, D.C. as well. And it's only one class I teach every year, but I'm still, because I spend so much time in the entrepreneurial business world, it's still, whenever I get those notices, it's like, please confirm you're available for your, to teach your course in, for the fall of 2022. Just like, who plans that far in advance? Like, I don't even know what country I'm going to live in. But anyway, that's just a little bit of comic relief there.
Yes. And right now, it's like when people start talking about conferences next year and things next year, I'm like, we will see. I mean, we can have plans, but we will see. Yeah. Nobody thought 2020 would be like it was or is. And let's just see what 2021 and 2022 will bring.
Yeah.
So I was talking about my my experience in these semesters already of teaching online. And before then that, I used to teach, I would say, very traditionally. Whiteboard, marker, and just explain and talk.
Here's the syllabus. We're going to do a lecture. Then there's going to be some assignments. You'll have some group work. And okay, yeah.
Yes. And I was already interested in the idea of the flipped classroom, but I looked at some IDs and I had introduced some videos, but very minor things. And then when we had to switch to online teaching from one day to the other, I kept doing what I was doing, just lecture through Zoom for an hour and a half. And that, of course, was not ideal. At that time,
At what point during, did you have the moment with yourself where you said, I have to fix this. I have to do something different in order to create, because I mean, I've looked at the screen with, 30 students and they're all kind of like, or they're distracted in some way or whatever. And you realize we have to do this different. What was that, at what point was it like a day in, a week in, a month in? What was it?
I think by the third lecture, I already felt like this is because most of my students have their video off, so I can't see their faces, I can't see their reactions, and I just felt like I'm talking to my laptop, and talking into the void, and for me it was not the same. Like when I'm in the classroom, I see my students, I have that eye contact. I can see when they start to drift off, or when they start to secretly watch a soccer video on their phone, or start to play a game. And I know that I have to switch something up. And in that case,
well, it just, it speaks to one of those things that we have. There's a speaker that we had on the Success Summit. Her name's Britt Andrea, Dr. Britt Andrea, I should say. And one of the things we talk about is just all of that nonverbal communication. And she's actually, there's a brain science out there that, we're actually sharing pheromones in the same room. And, it actually allows us to create that connectedness and that energy. So, in this virtual setting, even though you and I we're engaged, like we're still not sharing those physical pieces that take away. So anyway, just a side note there.
Yeah. And I even when my students have their video on, I find it hard to read them. When they're in the room, I can like sense the atmosphere in the room, whether it's an atmosphere of engagement or utter boredom, or distress on what I'm on a difficult topic. So I find it very hard now to really feel the overall feeling of the class. But back to knowing that didn't work, to just talk through and ask a question and have that silence of nobody speaking up. So I thought, didn't just think that I had to change. Our university was also really, and that is Universidad San Francisco de Quito, was then very, they were giving workshops. We all were encouraged to take a course on blended learning. And for me, that started a journey of trying to figure out what can I change? How do I deliver my content? How do I engage with my students in this new setting? Because I knew for sure the summer course would be in the blended flexible format. So I started to work on that, and I guess I then got to the point of making all the beginner mistakes of saying, there are so many fun things out there. Let's bring all the bells and whistles. Yes, bring all the bells and whistles, all the polls and the Mentimeters and the quizzes and the everything. So I got a little bit lost in the tools, and I do think I had much more engagement with my students, but I may have overloaded them. Also because in the summer it's an intensive version of the course. Summer semester is shorter, so it was a double intensity from the regular load, and then all the tools on top of that. So I may have overloaded them there and have forgotten the learning curve that comes with using a new tool. And so what I did before starting the course, the third run online of my course, I went back to the drawing board and said, okay, what is really important? What do I really want them to learn? And let's focus on that. I threw out some content of my course that I said, well, no, it's not part of the fundament of this class. I went back to my learning objectives. I went back to really what do I really want them to be able to do at the end of this semester? And let's really focus on that. Let's reduce the number of homework assignments. Let's focus on really the things that are important. Keep in some of the fun things, but condense what we really want to get through the semester. And that also, my students also mentioned in my evaluations last semester that they wanted, again, a little bit more of teaching from my side. So I've brought back some shorter lectures, and I'm still trying to find the right balance. I don't have all the answers, but that's sort of the path that I'm on. Fantastic.
And did you find that, the age gap, or that, usually students are younger, and even PhD students, were they more prepared to be using their phones, using, their laptops within that setting? Or did it feel like, hey, we're really kind of all starting at the same place? And like you said, these are new tools we've got to learn, or whatever. Was there a general sense of comfortability on their side, and you're catching up, or was it really, we're all doing this together?
I think it's really, we're all doing this together, because the tools that we use for teaching, especially coming from the background where we mostly are teaching traditionally whiteboard and marker, maybe a PowerPoint presentation, I think it requires not just a change in mindset for the teacher to think like, okay, I'm not going to sit here and talk to the students or to the void for an hour and a half. We're going to try and break this up, activate students during and outside of the set hours for teaching. And I think that has required a major shift in mindset, not just for teachers, but also for students who may be used to, lean back and let the content come, and may as well feel a little bit put on the spot when you start to tell them, I'm going to ask questions. You will have to, engage with me. So that I think it's a learning process for all of us.
Oh, okay. What about, so that kind of that second part of there, like asking questions and engagement, what about assessments, and what about measuring progress, and what about those? Has that fundamentally changed for you? Are there any new tools you're using there, or maybe you've relaxed some of those requirements as well? Like what's been your strategy for assessment?
Yeah, my strategy for assessment has also changed throughout these semesters. So I used to just have midterm exams and a final exam. And in my first semester of the emergency online version of the course, I kept what I had prepared in advance. And then, wanting to have more engagement in the summer, I started to add the homework assignments, and I started to add class participation as a requirement, etc. So I started to kind of add on before, going back to the drawing board and focus on what's really important. And for this semester, I actually dropped most of the exams, and I've kept only a final exam and switched to projects to see how that may work out in teaching students to really design concrete buildings, and see if maybe a project is a better tool. And I'm still learning there.
Fantastic. Eva, one of the question I end each of these interviews with is, what are you looking at now, 6 months down the road, maybe 12 months or 18 months down the road? Is there a shiny new object that you see coming down in ed tech that you really want to use? Is there a new pedagogy or a new technique that you're really interested in? Is it more of the same, or what are you excited about for 2021?
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great question, and even if this pandemic is over, I think teaching is changed forever. I think we are not going to go back. Even if we go back to the classroom, I think we will have learned that there's a lot of tools that we can keep using that increase student engagement, which I also plan to keep. I think there's more opportunity to ask a colleague who is in a different part of the world to send a video or even show up in class in digital form. So I think all of that is here to stay. I think, and I think with that, we will see more tools, more things to explore coming. So I can't predict what will be out there in 6 or 12 months from now, but I'm curious, and I'm excited to try out more things. Super. Even though I have to kind of slap myself on the head, like, not all the bells and whistles, not all the bells and whistles. a little bit of toying around is okay.
Excellent. Eva, this has been a really fun conversation. I encourage everybody to check you out at PhD Talk. We'll have the blog URL here in the notes of the show. And I hope that we get to catch up with you sometime in the future to see how things are going down in Quito.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks again for tuning into today's episode of the eLearning Podcast. If you like what you've learned today in this episode, I encourage you to either follow us or subscribe to us on Facebook or Twitter or YouTube. And please do share this episode with one or two of your colleagues or friends. Also, I just want to remind you that you can level up your online learning game with all of the information that's available at the eLearning Success Summit. You can get your free ticket at elearningsuccesssummit.com. And finally, you can also stay up to date on everything that's important, all the news and the resources for e-learning professionals at lmspulse.com. Get our free newsletter by just going to lmspulse.com today. Thanks again.